Tahaad Pettiford is picking up a lot of steam with NBA circles. Is he going to return to Auburn? Let's talk about it right here inside the town.
The Auburn Express. You are now listening to the War Rapport Longtown Podcast. With your boy Ike Jones.
What's up in War Eagle, everybody? You got Ike Jones right here inside of Lobtown talking a little Auburn basketball during the offseason. Thank you so much for checking us out. Let's get into the conversation about what Auburn basketball has going on right now. First and foremost, before we get into Tahaad Pettiford, I do want to talk a little bit about Chad Pruitt, who recently announced that he is going to be retiring as a coach and going into ministry. So just want to say congratulations to Chad Pruitt for making the transition to a different point in his life. He's been crucial. There are a lot of people who thought Chad Pruitt was going to be potentially in the running for even the women's basketball coach job there with Auburn, but he's decided to take a different direction after all of these years with the with Auburn basketball, and definitely wishing him the best of luck in the next phase of his life in ministry. And so that's going to be a big blow for Auburn basketball. You know, one of the things that Bruce Pearl has been able to do a really good job, though, is finding people to replace those folks that have left, right? When he had Coach Flanagan leave a couple of years ago, he got Coach Williams in, and Corey Williams has done a really good job for this program in his couple of years here with Auburn. And now they got to figure out how they're going to replace Chad Pruitt. And so looking forward to seeing what direction Coach Pearl and his staff do to replace him. Same thing when, you know, you lose a guy in the staff that's now on to be the head coach over at Florida after a stint in San Francisco, excuse me. You find ways to replace guys and get them in here into this staff, and he's done a really good job of getting a nucleus of guys together and keeping some of the people around him that have helped him to be successful. Chad Pruitt, one of those guys, multiple championships now, to his credit. And hopefully Coach Pearl finds an adequate replacement for him. But again, best of luck to Chad Pruitt. But let's get back into the conversation of what you guys are here to talk about. And that is Tahaad Pettiford. Tahaad Pettiford, of course, if you haven't been paying attention, has been going through the NBA draft process, a similar process that Janai Broome went through, that when he was here, Alan Flanagan went through a couple of times. Dylan Cardwell went through this process to go through and just kind of see where he sat with NBA scouts as far as his evaluations are concerned, and what things they have as feedback on things that he needs to work on to get his draft stock in a place where he feels comfortable to say it's time for me to move on to the next level and become a professional. Tahaad Pettiford, true freshman, playing a lot more minutes, I think, than they intended, and in a lot different role than I think Coach Pearl and staff had intended for him to do. But it allowed him to showcase his ability as a scorer and as a facilitator, playing a lot more of the point guard role for this team. But it also showed that he has a ways to go for the size profile that he has. He's going to need to be a lead guard in the NBA, and either need to be a really dynamic scoring lead guard or figure out how to be a little bit more efficient and be more of a facilitator. So, he needs to hone in a few things, but he came out blazing during those NBA draft camps that he was going to showcase a ton of athleticism, which, listen, if you watched Tahaad Pettiford last year, you knew that his athleticism was going to be off the charts. Just over 6 feet tall, and he has like a 6'5" wingspan, I think is what they recorded him as. His vertical leap was off the charts. He was doing all of the things necessary to show that he at least can defeat some of the things that people may have as negatives for him for his size. A little bit taller than what they thought. You know, they have him listed as 6'1". He's just below 6'1", according to the without, shoes on measurements there at the draft camps. And again, he has the explosiveness in his vertical. I think that the athleticism that he displays will defeat some of the narratives around his height, and then the long arms allowing him to have a longer wingspan. I think those things combined put him in a very different place. And when talking to Tahaad Pettiford after that first day that he had the stellar multiple 20-point game outbursts there in the scrimmages that they had, the conversation was around what would it take for him to keep his name in the NBA draft, and his answer was around first round guarantee. Right, like he wants to be in a place where he feels as if, or the scouting report says he's going to be a first round guy for sure. And this is how NIL has changed the landscape of things, right? Because guys who were surefire going to get drafted, which Tahaad Pettiford was going to come off of the draft board right now. He is definitely a second round draft pick in the NBA right now. Guys who were going to get drafted would go ahead and make that leap over into the NBA because the money was going to be there. Now, guaranteed money for a guy in the second round, probably going to be close to what he could make in NIL, and probably Auburn might be able to beat some of the money that would be in a guaranteed contract for a second rounder and a guy who may be playing on a two-way contract or something of that nature, or at the end of a bench trying to work his way into a rotational spot in the NBA. Whether he played more or not, the money's going to be the money once the contract is in place, right? And so you can go and you could do that in the NBA and you'd be there and you'd be done with school, right? Which is not a bad option, right? Like, I mean, this was the conversation that I've had multiple times on this show around why, people wondering why would a guy not come back to college and improve their draft stock? The answer is actually really simple, because you don't have to do the athlete portion of it, right? Whatever you feel about what NIL has done to the amateur nature of collegiate sports, you still have to go to school, right? You still have to go and participate in classes. You have to keep yourself academically eligible, whether that be through the assistance of a bunch of people or not. It still has to happen, right? You still have to show up. You still have to turn in work and all that. And even if it's just for appearances, it still has to happen. And so if you remove that portion of it and you can just focus on being a basketball player, some people prefer that lifestyle. Some people enjoy the collegiate lifestyle and they have aspirations to do things outside of sports with their careers. And so they want to be able to get the education that's afforded to them for free right now with the scholarship that they get for being able to be a collegiate athlete. But the NIL definitely changes the conversation and makes it a decision now between, do I go pro or do I stay in college and improve potentially my draft stock and what my contract could be on a guaranteed amount of money as a first round draft pick or as a lottery pick if you were in the back end of the first round and you're moving into lottery status after a year in an additional collegiate year. Those are the conversations that are now having to have or are having to be had with these athletes, because you can make a substantial amount of money that would be enough to decide, hey, I don't want to go pro just yet. I want to be able for my first professional contract to be one that is going to be well above what I could get in NIL. And that is a conversation that Tahaad Pettiford is having right now. And he's made it pretty clear that if he doesn't get that guaranteed or what he feels like is a guaranteed first round grade, then he's coming back to college. And he has made it abundantly clear if he returns to college, he wants to do that as an Auburn Tiger. So that bodes well for Auburn right now, because most of the projections, if you are a person who wants to see Tahaad Pettiford back playing inside of Neville Arena for the 25-26 season, most of the projections that you have for Tahaad Pettiford right now are around the front end of the second round, right? I think the highest projection that I've seen is about a 32nd, being picked 32nd overall, and as low as around 39th, right? And so you're outside of where you would want to be for a guaranteed first round. Like, he could clip the tail end of the first round potentially, right, if you got the best end of what you would get. But like, most of the projections have him around 35 to 37 as the draft pick, which is again at the top of the second round, but not where he wants to be. And you look at rookie wage scales and all those things to determine, okay, what would the conversation be like from a compensation standpoint in NIL to be close to that, whether it is equal to or more, for him to make it a financial decision that makes sense for him. So right now, it looks good if you are an Auburn fan and you would like to see Tahaad Pettiford back at Auburn, that he would return. Abundantly clear from the coaching staff that they would welcome Tahaad Pettiford back with open arms if that's the decision that he made. But Coach Bruce Pearl and the staff are committed to the idea that he may not return, and they want him to go and pursue the professional career that he's after if that is the thing that he so chooses to do. They're going to support him in that 100%. Now, again, I think they would like to have him back, and that's indicated by they really haven't gone aggressively after a guard to replace Tahaad Pettiford in hopes that they're keeping that roster spot available, and they're trying to keep in mind the other pieces that they would add around him, how much in NIL would still be available to Tahaad Pettiford should he make the decision to come back to Auburn. So right now, again, looking good for those who want to see him back in an Auburn uniform. But and I rarely engage in speculation, but I am going to do that for just a moment here and play the other side of this and talk about what happens if Tahaad Pettiford does not return back in an Auburn uniform. Let's take a look at what the current roster is right now for Auburn, and you see kind of where Auburn sits with the roster. And, if we're being honest, there's just not a lot of guards. Now, Caden Magwood is very similar to Tahaad Pettiford in a guy who is, again, Auburn has him listed as 6'1". They're probably closer to 6 feet than 6'1", but still guys who are just north of 6 feet tall, but athletic and can score really well, right? But the question is, who's going to be really the facilitator? Denver Jones was a guy at 6'3", 6'4", who was playing the primary lead guard role for Auburn, and could score, but wasn't a guy who really needed to be able to get points to be effective. He was an elite two-way guy who could get his when he needed to as a spot-up shooter. He could go and generate him, getting downhill and all that sort of thing, right? But he didn't need to be able to score to impact the game. I do wonder whether or not these two guys, Tahaad Pettiford, Caden Magwood, are going to need to be scorers to be impactful. Now, Tahaad Pettiford showed throughout the season that he is more than just a scoring guard. He can go out there and he can have games where he scores very little, but he has high number of assists, low turnovers, and really be a facilitator. But can he do that as the lead guard is the question that you have to ask yourself coming into this next season. And that's going to be something I think that he needs to prove to be able to improve his draft stock. He either needs to be a more efficient scorer where he's putting up consistently points that are, he's going to need to average probably 17 to 18 points per game plus next season in a high efficiency clip, and not have those anomalous games where he's barely in the scoring column and, he's maybe an offer from the field type of thing. He really needs to be a guy who's a solid double figure contributor and still have a high assist to turnover ratio as a lead guard. Or he's going to need to be a guy who maybe impacts the games in other ways more consistently. And he's going to get more minutes this next season should he return to Auburn. So he's going to get that opportunity. But as you look at the guards there, you don't really see a point guard on the team right now. So you'd have Tahaad and Caden as guys that would need to be able to facilitate and be in that role. And as a true freshman, I am sure that they don't want to have to put Caden Magwood in that role with high minutes just yet, right? I mean, it looks really good for him right now to be able to get minutes because there just aren't a lot of other guys that should be able to play that role for Auburn. There's not another guy on this team that you would see as a lead guard for this team. Simon Walker doesn't fit the profile of that. Kevin Overton's never played the lead guard type of thing. And then you get into a bunch of forwards and scorers after that. So they're going to have to look elsewhere if, again, and that is in a completely a scenario that I do not want to see happen and something that Auburn's not actively pursuing, they'd have to figure out where they're going to go in that regard. So let's speculate for a minute and see what's out there in the transfer portal, because that's where you're going to have to feel it. There aren't going to be any new guys entering the transfer portal. So if there's going to be another guard, it's got to be somebody who's out there already. There are a few guys that are currently available if, for whatever reason, Tahaad Pettiford makes the decision, NBA is where he wants to go, right? The highest rated guy out here on the board is PJ Haggerty. Now, he is rumored to be in talks with NC State. So I don't know that unless Tahaad Pettiford makes it clear really soon, and then Auburn can pivot if the decision is the NBA and make a full court press on PJ Haggerty, whether or not he was somebody who would even be potentially an Auburn Tiger in that regard. But it's not in the conversations right now. Again, any names I'm throwing out here, I'm not saying that the coaching staff has talked to or anything. This is not intel. This is me in fantasy land right now, right? So PJ Haggerty would be somebody who I think would fit the profile of what we're talking about, a guy who could either be a consistent scorer, bringing you 15, 16 points plus per game, and be a really major problem from an offensive standpoint and then turn into a facilitator. He could be your lead guard, point guard in that regard. He's a 6'3" guy, so he's got the size to be able to fill that role that was similar to what Denver Jones did last year. Not as good an on-ball defender as Denver Jones, but definitely a more dynamic scorer, at least from what he's shown at this level when he was at Memphis last season. The other guy that would be interesting would be Boogie Fland, who also was going through the NBA draft profile process and has officially withdrawn his name, but also made it clear he does not intend to return to Arkansas next season. Boogie Fland did not play a lot of minutes last year due to the injury that he sustained early in the season. Came on later in the season when Arkansas got into the postseason and showed why he was such a highly regarded prospect out of high school. But I just don't think NBA scouts had seen enough of a healthy Boogie Fland to be able to put that type of investment. So he's decided to come back to college for another year. Now, all the rumors circulating right now for Boogie Fland say that Florida actually is the place where he could potentially be landing. But he would be an intriguing prospect as well. He, again, would fit the profile of a really high volume scorer, a guy that could come in and be impactful in that way, but also, again, be a facilitator and a lead guard role for Auburn. From a defensive standpoint, again, I don't know that he fits the two-way profile of a guy who could be a lockdown kind of tip of the spear guy for your defense, but he definitely would be able to get you some points. And then the other name that I'm going to throw out here, and these are the highest rated guards that are out here, is Desmond Claude. He is transferred out of South Carolina, not South Carolina, from USC, from Southern California. And again, a guy he's 6'6", so he's a much taller guy, and you'd have a really tall lineup. You start to look really from an a physical profile, a lot like the Duke team last year, with a bunch of guys who would go 6'6" and above, 1 through 5. With how Sion James was a 6'6" point guard for them last year, and then they had a bunch of 6'7", 6'7", 6'8", and then the 7'2", right, going through their starting lineup. So you'd have that sort of team put together in that regard. But I think, again, it would be a very interesting thing for Auburn to go in that sort of direction if they went that way with their starting lineup. But option number one, I think, on the table for Coach Bruce Pearl and his staff is Tahaad Pettiford returns for the next season, and he improves his draft stock in a year where he's going to be asked to be the lead guard, and he's going to be functioning in that role with that mindset from the very beginning. Again, I do think that it's going to be a very different offensive type of team this year as well, when you don't have Janai Broome, who is the post-oriented guy. You're not going to have a Twin Towers type of look with Dylan Cardwell out there. You're going to be a more up and down the floor, up-tempo type of team. And I think that would fit what Tahaad Pettiford would like to do a little bit more. So it would be advantageous for both he and Cade Madwood for that style of offense to be implemented if he were to return. But I want to hear your thoughts on what you think is going to happen with Tahaad Pettiford. Again, a lot of good stuff happened for him. Day 2 wasn't as good for Pettiford. And so it showcased some of that inconsistency that you saw as a true freshman for him, where he can have hot and cold streaks. But again, that's not unusual. But he needs to be able to show, I think, a little bit more consistency from a scoring standpoint, because he is a scoring guard, and he needs to be that guy for whatever team he lands at. But I do want to hear from you all. What are you all's thoughts on Tahaad Pettiford and what he's going to be doing as an NBA decision for next year? Make sure you put those right down there in the comments as well. Make sure you like the video before you get out of here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Got a lot of film review for the basketball guys out there. We're going to get into some of these guys who have transferred over to Auburn and talk about some of the things that they're going to bring from a film standpoint. But we'll be talking about that stuff very soon with you all. Anyway, I'm out of here. Until the next time, and as always, War Eagle.